Grace and peace, beloved friends, and welcome to Your Week with St. Luke's. This is the fourth of our 4-week on our Advent series, where we've been looking at the gospel narratives of the Nativity, the birth of Jesus. And today, all four of us are here to finish it up, and we're in the fourth gospel. The other gospels are considered the synoptic gospels. They're seen together. They share a lot of material. But John is vastly different. John is coming from a different perspective. He's a different voice in the choir. It's also, John is is the latest of the Gospels. After the first century, it's the second century writing, probably early in the second century, around 110-ish time, and gives us just a totally different flavor and a different perspective of the Gospel of Jesus. And I like to think of it that way, as we each have different perspectives on the same thing. And when we share that, we get a bigger picture of what's happening here. So I'd love to ask you all, what else about John do we remember from this past year, remember from years of study? What else about John is unique, frustrating, exciting?
Well, John is where we get our I am sayings. So that's one of the things that we talked through earlier this year. So those I am the way, I am the bread of life, I am the good shepherd, those things that we kind of have embedded in our own sort of like scriptural memory. Those pieces come from John. John is also where we get Jesus turning water into wine, which I believe is a favorite of many St. Lukers, as I have heard. So some of those, like, so when you start to think about John, those are some of the pieces that are probably already in your biblical memory that you find in John.
Yeah, I'd say that the first 6 verses in chapter 1 read like spoken word,
know,
poetry, snaps, right? It's like, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God. But it's this very interesting kind of abstract theological communication about who and what Jesus is in the respect of this of the genre of a gospel. It's much different than any other gospel, which of course why it isn't one of the synoptics. It's not inspired in the same way, or it's not it doesn't draw references in the same way that the other gospels do. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because if Mark started with the end in mind, like the end, the cross and resurrection in mind, Matthew and Luke kind of start with the movement from Israel, from Abraham to the people, the context of the people in the middle in mind. Like John zooms way out to Genesis. John zooms way out to creation, to a cosmic understanding of again, gain perspective, folks, people. This is even beyond the empire. This is I'm in charge of the universe. I'm in charge of everything, of all of creation. And Jesus was there from the very beginning. There is not a separation. There's not dualism of God, then Jesus came into the world and God went, oh, I got to try something else. Like this is one being, which again, it's that perspective of, God, this is a moment in time that we live in. It's such a small, minute moment in time. And this is a bigger cosmic understanding. God is a bigger cosmic understanding. And so, yeah, while God is involved in this Christmas moment with us, God is bigger than that. I love the writer says, darkness will never apprehend the light, but it will also never comprehend it either. Darkness will never extinguish God's light, because it will never truly understand it. Like light. I always try to remind us, I remember saying it at Pulse, after Pulse. Remember, folks, God separated light and darkness. And it doesn't mean that darkness then somehow got away, got away from God's work. Yeah. It's still, everything is still under God's control. Do not worry. So that for me, John, is that do not worry, I got you.
Yeah. And to add with that pre-existence of Jesus creates a greater establishment of who Jesus is in a totally different way not angels singing. There's not prophetic. There's not lineage. There is, and that defining Jesus as the Word of God, right? And that it pre-existed God. Jesus did it. That's not good. Right. That to add on to that, that's just, it sets a different tone.
I think if you saw a conversation between the gospel writers, John would just be the one sitting in the corner going, yeah, Mark's going, but he's going to go to the cross and he's going to die and it's going to, this is, and John will go, yep. And Matthew's like, but he's the fulfillment of all of this, of this Israel and all of this. And John's going, yeah. And Luke's going, but look what's coming, look what's going ahead, and look at this story and all of this. And John's going, yeah, of course. And also all the rest of it. I mean, John is that knowing voice in the corner, wanting to really, really frame everything. And when you put it in that historical context of early 2nd century, this is when Christian theology started happening. We make assumptions about a lot of our theological concepts because we have centuries and centuries of experience of people being able to wrestle with these things. But people are first starting to wrestle with the theological implications of this and to craft creeds and to craft, statements of what do we believe and the separation of Christianity as its own thing. And so John has to be a little more theological. John is placing this in a bigger picture because it's not about the immediacy of the destruction of the temple. It's not about the immediacy of what's going on in that late 1st century time. We've moved into kind of a new era, and John gets the opportunity to help us place ourselves in that bigger picture to see it's beyond what we've experienced.
Yeah, and that's I like that. That's that establishment, right? There's the immediacy, there's a lineage, there's this, we're here, and this is Christ has always been here, and yeah, I like that's helpful in that historical context.
It's like for me, it's like going to the wise sage, and I'm not going to say an age. I'm not going to say old, because I actually feel like John is younger, and I don't know that. We don't know the writer's age, but I always, and maybe it's because of this book's influence and what we'll talk about in a minute with the house. I feel like it's a contemporary understanding, but it's that wise voice that like draws you back. And then Jesus is able to come in chapters like 14 and 15 and say, look, I'm the vine and you're the, just abide with me, just stay with me. If you love me, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Like that it's going to be okay. If you stay with me, I've gotten us through the whole creation of the universe. Like it's all good. And John settles me.
Yeah.
Settles me down, settles my heart down.
Yeah. And when we did the resurrection accounts, there's that consistency. You even mentioned the abide with me goes back to the Genesis 1, the John 1:1, and it connects even to Thomas when he says, my Lord and my God, right? He's saying, you're God. And Jesus has been saying that, abide with me, you're abiding with the Father in me. And, so John's got that settling, calming through line that yeah, it's literally, in a literary sense, is brilliant, and also in a theological sense, it's very
well, and
helpful.
It's that the first part, like Jeremy said, is this so lofty, cosmic, the Word was God, la 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 la. James Earl Jones kind of, I just hear him saying that, and then I interweave what Eugene Peterson says, and then that cosmic big God moved into the neighborhood. Came to be close, claimed to move into your neighborhood. And it's that, that big, it's not so big that you're not a part of it.
Yeah. Speaking of neighborhoods, Melissa, can you tell us more about the house and what the house might look like?
So John's house is one that kind of veers off in a very different way than Mark's does. It again doesn't give us that traditional Christmas look, those traditional Christmas elements. But the artist talks about that you can kind of see it glowing in the distance from a far way off, because there's something about it that kind of glows. There's light. Light is a huge piece of John's house. The artist renders it very contemporary and very modern. And kind of like Jen was talking about, but there's something about it that also is warm. A lot of times we consider contemporary architecture to be very cold and angles and things like that, and all of that's present. Lots of glass, but also just tons of light. There's a warmth that is cast, and our picture of John is a little bit of that sage character who is able to offer this bigger picture, comforting wisdom. The writer or the artist says, the house appears as a brilliant source of light that illumines the path and surroundings. Once the house has been seen, the observer can't turn away from it. Instead, one is drawn in and is invited to explore its surprises and mysteries. It's like walking inside a complex work of art. There are a lifetime of philosophical mysteries in this place, and just like the Gospel of John, they invite a lifetime of study and consideration. So there's something that not only reminds you of your place in the cosmos, that at Christmas, I envision this being all white lights at John's house. But that you find your place in the midst of it, but you also recognize that you have been invited to investigate all of it. It's not making you feel small, it's making you feel like you have access to so much more. So that's where we see John's house. What does that do for y'all? Does that feel Christmassy at all?
I'm giggling because the first thought I just had just now is Margot and Todd's house from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, where it's all like modern and sleek, and but that's not really what I think of, like Frank Lloyd Wright kind of styling, and how you capture what's outside and bringing it in and all that light. And
it's the guy's house. It's Ryan Reynolds' house from Spirited. The New York apartment that, has just the white trees and the lights and really sleek, which is interesting because, again, I look at my house and I love my house, and I love the way we decorate it and everything. But then I look at these like sleek, beautiful, clean houses that everything's white and silver and gold and perfectly put together and understated but warm. And I go, oh gosh. There's something that draws me in, and I love it, and I'm like jealous of it because there seems to be such order to it, but yet I could get comfortable and like sit down and put on it's funny. I'm very drawn to it.
It's order that makes you feel comfortable there because it's orderly, not order that makes you feel uncomfortable because you don't want to touch anything.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say that makes me feel uncomfortable because if I don't want to break it.
It's that there's a place for everything, including me. That kind of a feel, and that again, just imagine light. I just imagine lots of different like chandeliers and lamps and things like that. There's no like can lighting or overhead lighting. It's all that warm kind of yellowish glow that just feels at home. So
I don't know what the other word would be, but in my mind, I hear it as it's not a museum, right? But a blank. And I don't know what the other word is.
Yeah.
Maybe it is just a home. It's not a museum. But it's a home that's curated with things that hold meaning. You know what I mean? It is a place where you live and you do life and you get comfortable.
Well, and you'll see on Sunday in our video that we have given John an extensive library, that there is a library in John's house because there is much wisdom from many different sources. So while everything else is contemporary, there's lots of old books. So that kind of is the picture that we created for it. So yeah.
It's IKEA.
There you go.
It is, because you do feel comfortable at IKEA, right? Like they literally have you can sit on anything. You can lay on the couch.
I don't know why I've had that in my head like this whole time that we've been talking.
It's not a
IKEA.
museum, it's IKEA. Maybe that
Right.
should be the new
IKEA.
Yeah,
tagline.
it's not a
All
museum.
right, let's
It's
go.
IKEA.
Let's
I
keep
like
going.
that. I like that.
Jesus meets us in IKEA.
Swedish meatballs and all.
The
Right.
light came into the world and moved into IKEA. Anyway.
But I think that's hopeful. They're not IKEA. No.
No,
But
move
the
on.
rest of it is hopeful because I guess there's a sense of it's interesting because like if one of the gospels, probably Luke or Matthew, is more political, one is more in lineage and historical in terms of that movement. If Mark is salvific, then what is John? John is the theological one, but John is also like this hopeful kind of, I don't know, like redemption one. I don't know how to put it, but theological is it. It's the how do we talk about God and how do we think
Right.
about God and
Yeah.
And it sheds light on other possibilities of how to talk about God, right? And opens a little bit like Luke, opens up more possibilities. Definitely by expanding it further and drawing us back to Genesis in the beginning. Gives us more opportunities and options to see God and talk about God in new and life-giving ways.
Here it's in the book. Irenaeus said that God became what we are in order to make us what God is. And I don't ever think we talk about that. I think we're so afraid to say, we talk about becoming Christ-like, right? But it's that, I think, Jeremy, have you talked to us, and we talked about this before, where, it's imagining and an understanding of the image of God born within us, but we forget that we're of the same substance, and how do we become more like that? And I don't think that's something that we talk about because we're afraid to talk about that.
Yeah, I think we get a bit flustered when we begin to talk about us being made of the same stuff as God.
Right.
Right. But it's a huge comfort, and it is about, like, that's the walk that we walk as people of faith. That's sanctification. That is asking ourselves, what does it mean to be a force of love in the world, or to become a bigger source of love in the world, a more pure source of love in the world, like the God from which we come. Yeah.
It's almost like when we talk about love, it's more comfortable to say, I want God's love to work through me, rather than I want my love to be God-like. Right?
Yeah.
That feels whew, a little more uncomfortable. So yeah.
It says, God became what we are in order to make us what God is. That is, in order to set us free from all that hurt and brokenness and shame. The Word was made flesh so that we can be restored as the beautiful and loving people we were meant to be. The Word became us, flesh and blood, so that we might become what we were meant to be. We always, it's transformation, but we always consider our transformation as we are humans and we're going to do the best we can. But it is lifting us to this higher understanding of divinity within us at work, transforming us into what we were meant to be, which is a little lesser than the angels, the gospel says. And I don't think I don't take that seriously enough. I don't ever put myself loved as little lesser than the angels. Like, oh my gosh, that's powerful.
Yeah.
That's a different picture of discipleship, because we see disciples through the other three gospels, but John invites us to go a step farther. That's a lot.
And as Wesleyans, as Jeremy said, we believe that. Like, we're asked that at ordination. Do you believe you can move on to perfection? Yes, I do believe. Thanks. Then we step off the stage and then we move on with life and like, no. God's perfecting love.
And the thing about it is, like I always say, the only thing that allows me to say yes to that question about expecting to be made perfect in this life is me not limiting the power of the Holy Spirit, which is what the Advent season is about. God with us, right? So it really, I mean, whoever built this system called Christianity built it because it all comes back around. It all comes back around. And so I think that should be something that we all ponder during this season. How open are we to allowing God to do the work of being with us, of transforming through us through God's presence, especially in the Advent season, because it'll set us up for how we go into 2023, right. And how we see ourselves and how we see our place in our church and in our community, but also how we see God's place in our life.
Yeah. That was a great segue to talk about what's coming in after Christmas, which is looking into 2023. And we are going to invite all of you to ask that question of what is God doing in you? What has God been doing in you? And for you to look at your meaning and purpose in a bigger picture, in a John level cosmic understanding of where God has invited you to be part of all of creation. So that sounds really big, but we're going to walk through it together. So
we got a whole year to do it in. Right?
Yeah, as we move towards Christmas now, and as we look towards a new year, that's coming. So we hope that you will join us both this Sunday as we look at our last Sunday of Advent and look at the Gospel of John, and then on Christmas Eve. And you can find all of those times on our website. There are 9 services for you to choose from. So you can join us for any or all of them if you would like to either volunteer and help out or be a part of any of those. So we will see you this Sunday and then for Christmas Eve.